Taos, New Mexico Territory, July 1877. The stagecoach door slammed open with a groan, and Maria Estela Ramirez braced herself as the dry wind slapped her face like a warning. Dust coiled up from the hard-packed street and clung to the hem of her blue travel dress, turning it the same color as the land. Her boots hit the ground with a muffled thud, legs stiff from 3 weeks of travel. And for a moment she couldn't tell if the trembling in her limbs was from fatigue or something deeper. Dread, maybe? Or the weight of hope collapsing. The town of Taos shimmered under the noonday sun, low adobe buildings, a crooked church steeple, and silence that felt too curious, too watchful. Stella glanced around for a familiar face, though she'd never seen any of them before. Her heart beat in her throat. He was supposed to be here. Thomas Whitaker had written her 7 letters, each more urgent than the last. He'd described Taos as a growing hub of commerce, and himself as a respectable store owner, in need of a companion who could read, write, and hold her own in business, as well as the home. A man who spoke of shared futures and steady wages. He had called her practical, sharp-minded, and modest in expectation. She had believed him. A man in a vest and narrow eyes approached her from the edge of the boardwalk. "Miss Ramirez?" he asked, voice pinched and lips tight. She adjusted the small satchel on her shoulder, blinking the dust from her lashes. "Yes, I am Aldous Finch, Mr. Whitaker Sklerk. He sent me to speak with you." Stella's stomach dropped. She tried to steady her voice. "Where is Mr. Whitaker?" Finch cleared his throat and tugged at his collar. "He regrets that he cannot meet you personally. Circumstances have changed. He's married." The words hit like a misfired bullet. "Married?" she echoed, unable to keep the disbelief out of her voice. "To who?" "Miss Evelyn Monroe," Finch said, gesturing behind her. Stella turned just in time to see a tall woman with pale skin and an elaborate hat step down from a polished wagon. Her lips curled into a smirk so delicate it could have passed for sympathy, if not for the ice behind her eyes. "Mrs. Whitaker now," the woman said, offering her gloved hand like an afterthought. "Oh, you must be the correspondence." "Girl," Estella didn't take the hand. There was no blood left in her fingertips. "I came because your husband sent for me." "Well," Evelyn said with a tilt of her chin, "that was before he realized there were better prospects here in town. Surely you understand how a man's plans can change." Estella took a step back, the weight of humiliation scorching, hotter than the desert sun. A few townsfolk had gathered now, murmuring among themselves. One man whispered to a woman with a baby strapped to her back. Someone laughed. "I spent every coin I had getting here," Estella whispered. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Then perhaps you'll take the next stage back, or there may be work available. I'm in need of house help." It wasn't the words, it was the way she said them. Not like an offer, but a blade. Estella's breath caught in her chest. She could hear her father's voice from long ago. "They will only shame you if you let them." She squared her shoulders. "I didn't come to be a servant." Evelyn arched a brow. "And I suggest you find a man willing to take you in, though I wouldn't hold your breath." Low voice cut through the thick silence. "She won't have to." Stella turned. Standing just beyond the stagecoach was a tall man in dust-stained denim and a sun-bleached hat, broad shoulders, skin bronzed by the sun. His eyes were sharp and quiet, like flint before the strike. "I beg your pardon?"
"Evelyn,"
said, taken aback. The man stepped forward. "If Whitaker's changed his mind, then she's free to choose." He looked at Estella. His voice dropped lower. "You can choose me." The air in Estella's lungs froze. She didn't even know his name. "What did you say?" she whispered. The man touched the brim of his hat, called her Greyhawk, owner of Grey Mesa, north of town. "I need a wife who can keep up." "You came all this way looking for a life?" "I'm offering one." Estella blinked. The absurdity of it. She barely knew where she was, let alone who he was. "I don't even know you," she said. He nodded. "And I don't pretend to know you. But I know you've got grit. You made it here. That's more than most." Behind her, Evelyn scoffed. "This is outrageous. That woman is stranded, without resources, without I'll pay for her room at Senora Cruz's boarding house. Calder interrupted, never breaking eye contact with Estella. And I'll come back tomorrow. You can decide then. And with that, he tipped his hat and walked away like he hadn't just thrown a stick of dynamite into the middle of a burning wreck. Estella stood frozen, her mind spinning, while the townspeople around her fell into murmurs again. She could still feel Evelyn's eyes boring into her back, but all she could think about was the man's voice. Steady, plain-spoken, no promises, no apologies. Just a door she hadn't expected. Then she's free to choose me. For a long moment, after Calder Greyhawk walked away, Estella stood rooted to the dusty street as if her boots had sunk into the earth. People drifted back to their errands, though a few still cast lingering glances at her, the kind reserved for spectacle and misfortune. A lone dog barked somewhere near the livery. The hot wind scraped past her cheeks again, rough as old rope. She forced herself to breathe. Evelyn Whitaker's perfume drifted in the air suite, cloying, wrong for a place like this. My advice, Evelyn said lightly, leaning close enough for Estella to see the fine smug lines around her painted mouth, is to take the next coach east. Some women simply aren't meant for frontier living. Estella looked at her, then down at her own dust-covered dress, then at the dirt road she'd crossed half a continent to reach. Her voice came out steady. Manage. Evelyn blinked. Something annoyed flickered behind her smile before she turned away and climbed into the polished wagon waiting for her. Her driver flicked the reins, and the horses pulled her away clean, pristine wheels slicing through, dust like a blade. Aldous Finch cleared his throat, Miss Ramirez. I believe that's everything I was sent to relay. Stella stared at him. You knew he'd married. Finch's Adam's apple bobbed. Yes. Well, mister. Whitaker was going to send a telegram but didn't. Estella finished for him. He winced. He said he didn't want to wound your feelings. Estella let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Tell him he succeeded anyway. Finch nodded stiffly and retreated back toward the general store. Leaving Estella alone at the stage stop, the desert stretching out around her like a test she hadn't prepared for. Her chest tightened. She had nowhere to go. Owen. Waiting. Nothing left in her purse but a single silver coin and a train ticket she couldn't use. So this is how my new life begins? With humiliation as my welcome? The thought scraped across her heart, raw and aching senorita. A warm, older woman's voice called from the boardwalk. You need a place to sit before you fall. Stella turned to see a woman in her late 50s, hair pulled into a tight silver bun, eyes sharp but kind. She wore an embroidered shawl and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who understood disaster and had outlived it. I'm Senora Delfina Cruz, she said. I run the boarding house down the street. Come, Estella hesitated. I don't know if I can afford the tall cowboy already paid for your room, Delfina said, waving her hand dismissively. For tonight, either way. Tomorrow, you decide your life. Stella swallowed, Calder Greyhawk. The stranger with the steady eyes. The man who'd stepped in not out of pity, she could tell, but something else. Something unfamiliar to her, recognition, as if he'd seen her standing alone and understood the sting of it. Thank you, Estella murmured. Delfina offered her arm. Let's get you out of this sun before you melt into the street. They walked in silence for a time, adobe buildings rising on either side, casting long shadows that clung to the edges of the road. The boarding house sat at the end of the block, its walls freshly whitewashed, clay pots overflowing with red geraniums. A simple cross hung above the door. Inside, it smelled of stew, soap, and something like sage. Once they reached the small upstairs room, Estella set her satchel on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, fingers lacing tightly in her lap. Drink, Delfina insisted, handing her a cup of water. You look like someone kicked you off a moving wagon. Estella took a small sip. I came here to be a bride, she said softly. But the groom married someone else. Delfina exhaled through her nose. Thomas Whitaker is a man whose face changes with the sun shifts whichever way benefits him. You're not the first he's wronged, and you won't be the last. Estella closed her eyes, letting the words settle. I have nothing, Senora. That's not true, Delfina said. You still have choice, and a strong back, and sharper eyes than most who pass through here. Estella looked at her. That man, Calder. Why would he step in like that? Delfina's lips twitched. Calder Greyhawk is not a man who wastes words. If he said what he said, it wasn't for show. He doesn't care to impress anyone but marriage, Estella whispered, feeling the tremor in her own voice. He offered so easily. Not easily, Delphina corrected. Quickly, maybe, but not easily. Calder moves, like a man who sees the ground 3 feet ahead of the rest of us. Maybe he saw something in you he recognized. Estella let the idea thread its way into her thoughts. It unsettled her and calmed her at the same time. Delphina patted her shoulder rest. Tonight, let your heart be heavy. Tomorrow, lift your chin. When the door closed, Estella finally let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The betrayal, the shame, the sense of foolishness, and beneath all of it, a stubborn little ember of anger that refused to die out. She walked to the small window, pushing it open. The desert air swept in, warm and wild. The sky stretched endless and unbroken, a place where nothing waited for you unless you claimed it. Her future had cracked clean open in a single afternoon. But as she stared at the horizon, the man's voice echoed through her memory, again firm, unshaken. Then she's free to choose me. Stella tightened her grip on the window frame, the desert wind pulling at her hair. Maybe. Choice was the only thing she had left. If tomorrow brings a crossroads, I'll walk straight into it. The scent of roasted corn and chili wafted in through the open window, drifting over Maria Estella Ramirez as she stirred awake to a world still heavy with silence. For a moment she forgot where she was. The texture of the wool blanket under her palms was unfamiliar. The absence of her father's guitar strumming in the morning was louder than the cicadas outside. Then it came back. Toast, the dust, the betrayal, and that man's voice. Then she's free to choose me. She sat up slowly, spine stiff from too much tension and too little sleep. Light cut through the window in slats, catching. The clay-white walls and the small wooden cross hung just above the mirror. Stella rose and moved to the wash basin, splashing cool water on her face. It helped sharpen the memory. She remembered Evelyn's smirk, the heat in her cheeks, when the townsfolk had stared, the churning knot in her stomach when Calder Greyhawk spoke up, like someone had suddenly shifted the ground beneath her and offered her a steadier place to stand. Stella didn't believe in easy answers. She didn't trust quick mouths, or men who offered too much too soon. But Calder hadn't promised anything. He'd offered plainly, simply, and walked away. That was what unsettled her most. Downstairs, Senora Delphina had already laid out breakfast. Warm tortillas, beans, coffee. She didn't speak at first, only nodded as Estella filled her cup. The two women sat by the window, steam rising between them. "You slept like a woman with rocks on her chest," Delphina said finally, not unkindly. Estella offered a tight smile. "And I woke like one who forgot how to breathe." "That'll pass," Delphina said, "or you'll grow used to it." She folded her napkin neatly. "He'll be back today," Stella nodded. Once, not asking who he was, she knew. "I don't know what to say to him. You don't know him anything. But you also don't know Whitaker your silence, or Evelyn your pride." Delphina leaned back. "That man Greyhawk, he's not trying to buy you. Saw fire in you yesterday, and he offered to keep it lit. That's rare." Stella sipped her coffee, eyes fixed on the street outside. A woman with 2 small children walked past holding a basket of eggs. A horse snorted at the post. Life went on, unbothered by her broken plans. Around midday, the knock came. Not loud, not hesitant, just there. Delphina opened the door, and Estella rose from her chair before she could think better of it. Calder Greyhawk stood there, hat in hand, boots dusty, shirt rolled to the elbows. His expression hadn't changed. It still bore that unreadable calm, like a man used to long silences and sudden storms. He gave Delphina a polite nod. "Senora, Mr. Greyhawk," Delphina said. "She is here." "She's thinking." Then she slipped into the kitchen, leaving the door open just enough for dignity. Calder looked at Estella and waited, didn't move toward her, didn't fill the air with explanation. Estella folded her arms, gaze steady. "Why did you step in yesterday?" He held her eyes. Because you deserved better than being left in the dirt with people watching like it was theater. That's not a reason to offer marriage, he said, but it's reason enough to offer you a choice. Estella tilted her head. What exactly are you offering, Calder? Took a moment before answering. I need someone who can run numbers, speak to the traders, and hold her ground when a bull breaks loose. Someone who doesn't wilt in heat or gossip, and if I say no, then I ride back to Gray Mesa and wish you well, that is all. There it was again, that strange calm, like everything he said was already measured and weighed. No pressure, no desperation, just truth. Stella took a slow breath. If I come out there, it's not as a bride. Understood. I want to see what kind of life I'd be stepping into. Not promises, not rings. Calder nodded. I'll be outside with the horses. Take your time. She watched him leave, then turned to Delphina, who peeked around the corner with a smirk. He's not much for speeches, Delphina said. No, Estella replied, but he listens like it matters. 10 minutes later, Estella had changed into a sturdier skirt, boots she hadn't worn since the train, and her father's old scarf tied at the waist. She stepped outside into the heat and found Calder already mounted on a chestnut gelding, holding the reins to a dapple-gray mare. She's steady, he said, offering her the reins. Not fast, but she won't spook easy. I don't spook easy either, Estella said, swinging up into the saddle. They rode in silence for the first mile. The landscape opened wide drust-red hills, low brush, clusters of cottonwoods where water ran shallow. The mesa loomed in the distance like a sleeping god. After a while, Calder spoke. You ever lived on a ranch? No. But I know how to run books, fix a saddle, and shoot a .32 Smith if I need to. He glanced sideways. Where'd you learn that? My father was a mule driver. Taught me everything he didn't want me to need. Calder gave a low hum of appreciation. Sounds like he raised you with both hands. Estella felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. He did. Gray Mesa came into view, a modest spread of buildings framed by scrub and sky. A barn, a windmill, a garden bordered with rocks. Chickens darted between the fences. It wasn't grand, but it was alive. A man emerged from the barn, tall with wild black hair tied back, and a grin too wide for propriety. Well now, he called out, you didn't tell me the Maylord or bride had teeth. Sincel Calder said evenly, this is Estella Ramirez. She's here to look, not to marry. What? Yet, Incel added with a wink. Estella raised an eyebrow. You always this charming? Only when I meet women smarter than Calder. Tipped an invisible hat and walked toward the chicken coop, whistling. Calder helped her down from the saddle. She didn't need it, but she let him. His hands were warm, calloused, careful. They walked through the property together. He showed her the barn, the dry goods, the half-fixed fence, the books that needed balancing. She asked questions. He answered with the kind of brevity that invited trust, not evasion. By late afternoon, they stood near the back porch, the wind moving through the mesquite like a whisper. Calder spoke first. This isn't much, but it's real. It is work, and it's yours as much as mine if you want it. Estella looked out at the land, not beautiful in the usual way, but raw and honest. I'm not sure what I want, she admitted. Calder didn't flinch. That is allowed. She turned to him, and something in her chest loosened. Not certainty, but the absence of fear. A man who speaks without flowers, she murmured, might still plant something worth growing. He said nothing, but his eyes told. Her, he heard every word. A man who speaks without flowers might still plant something worth growing. The wind shifted near sunset, stirring a thin veil of dust across the yard. Estella stood on the porch of Gray Mesa, one hand resting on the splintered rail, the other still holding the worn ledger book Calder had given her. Pages yellowed with age, numbers scratched in a hand, too hurried to trust. She didn't need to look long to know it was a mess. She'd spent the last 2 hours inside the small front room, which doubled as Calder's office and dining area. The walls were lined with shelves holding tins, cracked cups, and a Bible that looked untouched. The only sign of sentimentality was a sketch of a woman in charcoal tucked behind a jar of dried chili flakes. Now, in the open air, Estella let the breath she'd been holding ease out slowly. The quiet here was different than in town. It wasn't empty, it was watchful. Like the land had memory and was waiting to see what she would do. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't T-turn. "I see now why you need help," she said plainly. "These numbers haven't balanced since the war ended." Calder came to stand beside her, arms folded across his chest. "Never learned bookkeeping the right way. My father kept everything in his head. I kept the habit. You're lucky you're still solvent." He tilted his head slightly, that bad. She handed him the ledger, flipping it to a page where the ink had faded and calculations were scrawled in the margins. "I'm not even sure if you're in debt or accidentally richer than you think. That is how bad," Calder chuckled. "Low and dry? Then it's good you came." Stella arched a brow. "I Haven T said I am staying." "No," he agreed. "But you're still here." She couldn't argue that. From across the yard, the barn doors creaked open. An unselled Bluefeather emerged, brushing straw off his trousers and yawning. He waved lazily with 2 fingers. "You gonna keep her crunching numbers all night, Calder? Let her see the part of the ranch that doesn't smell like ink?" She asked to understand the place. Calder called back. "You can take her around." Estella looked up at him. "You trust him with your future bride?" "It's not a bride yet," Calder said, meeting her gaze. "But I trust him." Waited by the gate, grinning like a schoolboy who knew he was about to cause trouble. "I'll show you the good parts. It's the ones that actually move and bite." Estella followed him, notebook in hand, skirt hitched slightly to avoid the thorn brush. As they walked the perimeter of the property, Ensel pointed out the water. Lines, the cowherd grazing near the edge of the south fence, and the shallow arroyo that flooded every spring but hadn't washed out in years. "You really came all the way from Santa Fe?" he asked as they walked. "Farther," Estella replied. "Boston, then Santa Fe." "My mother was from Chimayo. My father moved us north after her passing." Ansel nodded. "You don't sound like Boston, I shed it." He smiled. "Good. No one trusts too many syllables out here." They came to a small corral where 3 horses stood in the cooling light. One of them, a young Palomino, pawed at the dirt nervously. Ursel stepped into the pen and motioned for Estella to join him. "This one's got fire in her," he said. "Skittish but not mean. Reminds me of someone I met yesterday." Estella eyed him. "Are you always this subtle?" "I'm not trying to be." He offered her the reins. "Let her walk beside you. If she trusts you, she'll show you." Estella took the reins gently. The mare shifted, uncertain. Estella didn't speak, just let the silence fill the space between them. After a moment, the horse's ears turned toward her. One step, then another. Ansel whistled. "Low, huh?" thought she'd be bold. "She's not afraid," Estella said. "Just tired of being misread." They stayed with the horse until dusk deepened.
Ash.
On the walk back, Ansel said, more serious now, "He's a good man, Calder, but he's got his ghosts. Dante we all. He keeps his under lock and key. Never talks about the war or his brother, and he don't laugh easy." Ansel glanced at her. "That doesn't scare you?" Estella thought about it. "I don't mind quiet, as long as it's not hiding something cruel." "That's fair." They returned to the house just as Calder was lighting the lantern in the front room. Estella entered, brushing dust from her sleeves. She handed Calder the notebook. "For weeks," she said. "That's how long it'll take to straighten the ledgers. Maybe longer if I help with livestock orders." He nodded. "And after that? I don't know yet." Calder accepted her words like a man who knew not to rush what wasn't ready. He motioned to the dining table. "I made supper. It's just beans and fried bread." She raised a brow. "It's cooked." "I cook better than I write." Numbers. They ate in relative silence, the occasional creak of the wood floor or scrape of a fork the only interruption. Calder didn't press her with questions. Stella appreciated that more than he could know. After the meal, she stood and stretched. "I'll need a space to work. Somewhere quiet. There's a loft over the barn," Calder said. "Dusty, but it's yours." She looked at him for a long beat. "You're really doing this?" I am. You don't know anything about me, I know you're honest. And you didn't fold when they tried to humiliate you. That's more than most. The way he said it without flattery, without need, it landed somewhere deep. Shh. Stepped out onto the porch again, this time with less hesitation. The wind was cooler now. The stars had started to cut into the velvet sky like tiny promises. She still didn't know what she wanted, but she wasn't afraid of finding out anymore. Behind her, Calder watched from the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable. She doesn't flinch from dirt or truth, and I can't stop looking. 3 days passed. By the 4th, Estella knew the rhythm of Grey Mesa better than she had known any place in years. The sun cracked over the eastern ridge each morning like clockwork, lighting up the field before the rooster even had the decency to crow. She woke before Calder, started the stove, organized the ledger notes she had rewritten the night before. She didn't ask for permission. She simply did what needed doing. Calder didn't hover. He watched quietly, respectfully. And when they passed each other on the porch or met eyes over a midday glass of water, something subtle shifted between them, less uncertainty, more acknowledgement. No promises, just presence. That morning, Stella had just finished calculating a new grain order when Delfina's handwriting arrived at the ranch, in the form of a folded letter stuck inside a basket of eggs delivered by a traveling peddler. The note was short. Evelyn has been talking loudly. Best you come into town before your story becomes someone else's. Day. Estella set the paper down on the table and stared at it for a full minute. She had known it wouldn't stay quiet forever. Whitaker's humiliation had been too public. Evelyn's pride too fragile, but she hadn't expected it so soon. She found Calder outside the barn, mending a broken gate hinge. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, sleeves rolled up as usual, focus narrowed to the task in front of him. I need to go into town, she said. He glanced up. Problem, not yet. But it might become one. Gave her a long look. Want company? She shook her head. No. If I'm going to face it, it needs to be on my terms. Calder nodded once and handed her the reins to the mare. Be back before sundown. I trust you, but I don't trust the folks who talk too much. Her ride into Taos was quiet, except for the echo of her own heartbeat. The town looked the same sun-baked adobe, smell of mesquite, wind-stirred silence but as she passed. The mercantile, she felt it. Eyes. People paused too long in their conversations. Others turned away with poor subtlety. By the time she reached Delfina's boarding house, her jaw was tight, teeth clenched against the ache building. Behind her temples, Delfina met her at the doorway, arms crossed. You didn't waste time. Neither did Evelyn, Estella said. She's told people you threw yourself at Thomas, that you misled him. That Calder was already attached to you, and you used it. Estella nearly laughed. That's rich. She's also said you planned to marry Calder so you can take over his land. Called you a Spanish snake with a silk tongue? Stella's blood heated. Why? Should have burned those letters in her front yard, she muttered. Delfina stepped aside. Or you could speak. What? In the saloon? Stand up on a table and tell everyone the truth? Not everyone, Delfina said. Just her. Loud enough for the rest to hear. Estella hesitated, then sighed. If I walk away from this, they'll believe her. Delfina nodded. That's how stories are born here. Whoever speaks last wins. So Estella rode back toward the center of town and tied her horse to the post outside the Whitaker Dry Goods. The little bell above the door rang as she entered. The place smelled of flour, cedar, and hypocrisy. Evelyn was there, of course, wearing a pastel dress, far too delicate for any kind of work. She looked up, and her face bloomed with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Well, look who returned. I thought you might be halfway back. East by now? Estella didn't waste time. She stepped forward, voice clear. I came to settle something. Several heads turned from the nearby shelves. A man with a sack of grain paused mid-reach. A young girl leaned into her mother's skirts. Estella didn't care. I came to Taos because your husband sent for me, she said. He wrote letters, signed and dated. He asked me to come and be his wife. I did not deceive him. He deceived both of us. Evelyn's mouth twitched. He had a change of heart. He had a lack of spine, Estella shot back. And instead of owning it, he sent a clerk and a lie. Murmurs rippled. Through the store, Estella stepped closer. I'm not here to shame you, or to win anything. I've already found more decency in Gray Mesa dirt than I ever would have in Thomas Whitaker's promises. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. So you are staying with him? The half-breed cowboy with a patch of rocks and a broken barn? Stella's voice lowered, sharpened. He offered me respect, which is more than your husband offered either of us. Silence spread like a crack down the center of the room. Then, behind Estella, a voice drawled, I'd say that's the truest word spoken in here all month. She turned in cell, of all people, lounging near the canned peaches like he'd wandered in by accident. He gave her a slow wink. Estella didn't smile, but her spine straightened. She turned to Evelyn one last time. I won't be your shadow story. Say what you want. But I won't stay silent while you rewrite me. She turned and walked out, leaving the bell to ring sharply behind her. Outside, Ansel caught up quickly. You came loaded for bear, he said. I came ready to be done. Well, he grinned. You just made yourself real in their eyes. That's step one. What's step two? Make sure Calder knows you're not running. She looked toward the mesa in the distance. I'm not. That night, as dusk wrapped Gray Mesa in indigo and gold, Estella sat outside with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. Calder sat nearby, boots propped on the railing. You made noise, he said without looking at her. Evelyn made fire. I returned it, he nodded, and you're still here. I'm still deciding. But I don't feel like hiding. The quiet settled, deep, peaceful. She looked out over the land, toward the place where the mountains met the edge of sky. If I'm to build something from nothing, let it begin with my own words. The next morning, the mesa was still under a pale veil of dawn light when Estella stepped into the kitchen, apron already tied and sleeves rolled. The cazarin pan sizzled with bacon, and the coffee was halfway brewed. The same rhythm as always, except today wasn't the same. Today, she was going to lay out terms for a life not yet promised. She had written them down the night before, alone in the loft above the barn, where the dust hung in quiet columns and the crickets sang until her pen stopped moving. It was romantic. It wasn't even dramatic. But it was clear. Calder found her outside, checking the barn doors, paper folded tight in her palm. You look like someone heading into a duel, he said, tone mild. Estella handed him the page. No, just into a partnership. He read the list without a word. Every now and then, his brow lifted at equal voice in ranch decisions, and again at freedom to leave with dignity if the arrangement becomes disrespectful. When he finished, he looked up. I don't have anything to add, he said. Just one question. What's that? Does this come with a wedding date? Estella didn't blink. Only if we agree the contract is fair. Calder folded the paper again and slipped it into his shirt pocket. It is. She stared at him, trying to catch a hint of irony or performance. But his eyes were steady. That's it? She asked. No argument? He shrugged. You wrote it like a woman who's had to fight for everything. I don't see a reason to make you fight me too. It was the first time she felt the knot in her chest loosen in days. Maybe weeks. They decided the ceremony would be quiet, just Delphina, Ansel, and a visiting priest from Abiquiu who owed Calder a favor. No fanfare, no parade. The wedding date was set for Sunday. In town, word spread faster than wildfire. She's marrying him for the land. She's not even baptized proper. He's crazy. Or cursed. Estella ignored it all. She wasn't marrying for land. She was marrying because Calder Greyhawk treated her as if her survival hadn't been an accident but a strength. And he didn't look at her like a problem to be solved. 3 days later, she stood in the field behind the barn, wearing a borrowed cream dress with faded lace sleeves. Delphina had altered it in one night flat. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and lavender soap. Estella's hands didn't tremble. Calder stood waiting beside the priest, hair tied back, boots polished, jaw freshly shaved, but still shadowed. Ansel stood behind him, arms crossed, too proud to smile fully, but eyes bright with mischief. The vows were short. Calder didn't make promises he couldn't explain. He simply said, "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, and I want to build something with you." Estella's response was shorter. "Then let's build." The priest blessed the union. Delfina wiped one cheek discreetly. Ansel let out a single whoop before composing himself. There were no rings until Calder pulled a small silver band from his pocket. Simple, hand-shaped, likely not new. "My mother's," he said, sliding it onto her finger. She wasn't given much, but she held on to this. Estella turned the band slowly with her thumb. It felt heavier than gold. The celebration afterward was modest coffee, bread, smoked meat, and music played from an old fiddle, Ansel dug out of the attic. Lucinda Morales, the wide-eyed girl from the next homestead over, arrived halfway through with a bundle of wildflowers and more questions than sense. "Are you really a mail-order bride?" she asked Estella, eyes huge. "Did he buy you?" Estella laughed. "No, darling. I wrote my own price." Lucinda grinned. "I want to be like you when I get out of here." Estella knelt. "Then don't wait to leave. Build something where you stand." That night, the house was quiet. There was no wedding night in the usual sense. Calder poured her a cup of tea, and they sat on the porch beneath a canopy of stars, saying very little. "You can take the front bedroom," he said. "I'll stay in the barn until we figure out what comfort looks like." She looked at him, steady and sure. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." And then, not quite touching, not quite needing to, they sat together as the wind moved across the mesa. The next morning, Estella woke before sunrise and put on the dress again just for a minute. She stood in front of the cracked mirror and steadied herself, silver ring catching the light, hair pinned but loose. Not a wife in the way the town thought. Not a girl waiting to be rescued. Something new. Something chosen. When she came down for coffee, Calder was already at the table writing a list for the week's chores. "Looks like we've got 2 steers to trade and a fencing job behind the orchard." She took the list and sat beside him. "And your books are still a mess." He smiled at that, just barely. It was fireworks. It wasn't fairy tale, but it was real. And real was enough. He didn't ask for love, but he made room for it. The days after the wedding settled like dust, slow, steady, and everywhere. No big changes. No great revelations. Just work. Gray Mesa didn't pause for new beginnings. Fences still sagged, cattle still wandered, and the books still needed correcting. Estella fell into it all with a quiet focus that surprised even herself. She woke before the light, scrubbed pans left soaking overnight, sorted feed, then moved straight into numbers. Every day had a rhythm, but beneath that rhythm, something else pulsed quietly between her and Calder. Not distance, not closeness. Unfamiliar middle space. They worked side by side. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. But even in silence, Estella could feel his presence like the weight of a warm coat, protective, but not suffocating. Until the letter arrived. It came in the morning mail, tucked between a saddle order and a seed catalog. The envelope was heavy parchment, her name written in unfamiliar ink. Estella read it on the porch, while Calder worked near the barn. "Dear Miss Ramirez, I regret the way things ended between us. I acted in haste and without honor. Evelyn's influence was considerable, and I fear I allowed my judgment to be compromised. If there is any part of you that still considers what we once spoke of, please allow me a meeting. I will make things right." Thomas Whitaker. She read it twice. By the third time, her stomach had gone hollow. It wasn't just the gall of the words, it was the arrogance. Assuming he could re-enter her life like a misplaced coin, flipped back into her palm. She looked toward the barn. Calder hadn't noticed yet. Estella folded the letter carefully, slid it into her apron, and went back inside. She didn't tell him. Not yet. Not because she doubted him, but because she didn't want Whitaker's voice echoing in this house. Not today. The moment passed, but the weight stayed. Later, they repaired the south gate together. Calder hammered while Estella held the wood in place. Their hands brushed once. Neither spoke. Ansel rode in around noon, leading a skittish new mare and grinning like a man who knew too much. "Y'all look more married than most 10-year couples," he said. No yelling. Just glances and tasks. Estella rolled her eyes. "Is that your standard?" "It's Tao's S standard." Calder wiped his brow. "You bring the saddle oil?" Ansel tossed him the tin. "Brought something else too. News." He leaned against the fence, suddenly more serious. "Whitaker's coming out this way. Said he's doing business with traders near El Rito. But he's been asking questions about Gray Mesa." Estella froze. Calder caught the shift in her posture instantly. "What kind of questions?" Ansel shrugged. "About your books? Your wife? What kind of operation you're running?" Calder's jaw clenched. "Why now?" Ansel tipped his hat back. Maybe he realized what he gave up. Estella didn't speak. She didn't have to. Calder turned to her. "Did he write you?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "I didn't answer," she said quickly. "What did he want?" Estella's fingers tightened around the fence rail. "To talk. To meet. Said he'd make things right." Calder didn't move, didn't speak. But something changed in the air between them. Not distance, not anger. Something heavier. "I wasn't going to hide it," she added. "But I also didn't want to bring his name into our house." Calder finally nodded. "I get it." Ansel cleared his throat. "If he rides out here, you want me close?" Calder shook his head. "If he rides out here, he won't get past the gate." That night, Calder didn't sit on the porch like usual. He stayed in the barn long after sunset, cleaning tools that didn't need cleaning. Estella watched him from the window, heart pulled tight. She wasn't afraid of Thomas Whitaker, but she hated the ghost of him how icily. He thought he could step back into her life like it was still his to access. The next morning, she made a decision. She dressed in her dark blue skirt, braided her hair tightly, and rode into town. Whitaker was at the hotel, of course. Always somewhere polite. Clean. Controlled. He didn't recognize her at first. When he did, he stood too fast. "Estella," she held up a hand. "Don speak." He froze. She walked toward him slowly, every step deliberate. "You sent for me. Then discarded me. You lied. You hid behind a clerk. You married a woman who poisons everything she touches, and now, you think what? That you made a mistake? That I'll come back?" He opened his mouth. She cut him off. "No, you don't get a second look. You get this, I'm not yours. You don't get to rewrite the end just because you regret the middle." Whitaker paled. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm free. And I will not spend a second more explaining myself to a man who couldn't keep his word for a single sunrise." She turned and walked out without waiting for his reply. When she returned to Gray Mesa, Calder was saddling a horse. He looked up, alarm in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She dismounted. "I went to town. I saw him." Calder nodded, jaw tense. "What happened?" "I told him the truth." Calder studied her for a long moment. "Did it help?" "I don't know." But it didn't hurt. They stood in silence for a while, the late sun stretching their shadows across the dirt. Finally, Calder said, "I won't ever ask you to forget what he did, but I'll stand next to you while you remember." She looked at him, something in her chest breaking open, not with pain, but relief. "He doesn't get to shape who I am now," she said. "You don't either. But somehow beside you, I remember myself better." Calder reached for her hand. Not to pull her in, just to hold. The past didn't vanish. It just lost its grip. The heat broke the next morning. Rain had been threatening for days, hovering on the edge of every dusk, teasing the soil with clouds that never opened. But sometime before dawn, the sky gave in. A slow, soaking rain fell across Gray Mesa, soft and rhythmic, like the land had finally exhaled. Estella stood at the kitchen window, watching water trail down the glass in narrow, glistening lines. The smell of wet earth rose through the floorboards. For the first time in weeks, the desert looked less like a battleground and more like something capable of tenderness. She clutched a warm mug between her hands, but her mind wasn't on the rain. It was on the way Calder had held her hand the night before. The simplicity of it. The intention. Not possession. Not comfort. Something quieter. Understanding. He entered the kitchen barefoot, shirt still damp from his early walk through the pasture, hair tied back but escaping in dark strands around his temples. "You're up early," he said, voice rough from sleep. "Didn't he sleep much?" Calder poured himself coffee, leaned against the counter. "Bad dreams?" "No," she said. "Too many thoughts." He nodded like he knew exactly what that meant. She turned toward him. "I don't want to just exist here, Calder. I don't want to be your wife in name while I quietly balance books and feed hens." His brow furrowed slightly. "You've never just existed. You run this place better than I ever did." "That's not what I mean," she said. "I mean, I want to be part of the vision, of what this land could be, not just maintain it, but shape it." A pause. Then, softly, "Do you see me like that?" He set his mug down slowly, walked toward her, and when he stopped just in front of her, he said, "I see you like a map I've never learned to read, but I keep trying anyway. You walk through this place like it already answers to your name." Estella's throat tightened. She blinked, looked away before the emotion rose too high. Calder added, "We can shape it together. But only if you speak your ideas." So she did. She laid out her plans, rotating cattle to protect the pasture, setting up a small side business selling woven goods and soap, organizing a trade ledger with the other ranch wives to stabilize prices during dry seasons. She spoke quickly, nervously at first, then with building momentum. And Calder didn't interrupt once. When she was done, he smiled small and crooked. "You're not building a ranch. You're building a community. I'm building something that can outlive us both." They spent the rest of the morning cleaning the old storeroom that would become her workspace. Dust coated everything. Spiderwebs stretched like curtains from ceiling to floor. But Estella worked like someone possessed, trolling up sleeves, hauling crates, sweeping hard enough to raise more dirt than she pushed. By midday, the room had light. Later, she stood at the center of it, sweaty and covered in cobwebs, arms crossed, surveying the cleared floor and sunlit windows. Calder entered, holding a hammer and nails. "Floorboards loose near the back wall," he said. "Want me to fix it now?" She nodded. "Only if I can watch." He grinned. "That's the only reason I'm doing it." As he worked, Estella leaned against the doorframe. The air between them felt different, now less tentative, more solid. "You were quiet when I said I wanted to trade with the ranch wives," she said. "I was thinking about Evelyn," he replied, not looking up. "She doesn't speak for all of them, but she's loud enough that some might listen." Estella nodded. "Then we outwork her, outlast her." "You're not afraid she'll come for you again?" "She already did, and I didn't bend." Estella exhaled. "What scares me isn't her. It's settling into smallness." That made Calder pause. He sat back on his heels, looked at her. "You couldn't be small if you tried," he said. "But if you ever do, we'll remind you." Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds broke open to sharp sunbeams, gold and warm, cutting through the gray like a promise. Estella stepped into the yard, lifted her face to the sky, let the sun dry the sweat and rain off her skin. Delphina arrived an hour later, holding 2 baskets, one full of dried chili, the other of rumors. "You should know," she said, setting the baskets down. "Whitaker and Evelyn are leaving town. Word is, they're heading north. California, maybe?" Estella blinked. That S. Sudden. Not so sudden. After your little speech and his wandering eye, Evelyn burned bridges faster than she could mend them. Nobody wants to do business with either of them anymore. Estella didn't tease smile. But a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying slipped off her shoulders. "You're not pleased?" Delphina asked. "I'm relieved. But I'm also done giving them space in my thoughts." Delphina chuckled. "That's power. When you stop building rooms in your head for ghosts." Estella looked toward the field. Calder was walking the fence line, shoulders relaxed, stride unhurried. Something in the way he moved reminded her of trust, not given easily, but once earned, deeply rooted. She looked at Delphina. "He's not like other men." "No," the older woman said, "and neither are you like other women." That night after supper, Estella sat by the window, ink-stained fingers flipping through her ledger. Outside, the mesa glowed under a fading pink sky. Calder leaned in the doorway, watching her. "Mind if I ask something?" he said. "Go ahead. When you came here, what were you really hoping to find?" She looked up, then out the window. Thought for a moment, then answered, "A place where I didn't have to shrink to be loved." Calder didn't speak. He didn't need to, because in this house, on this land, under this sky, she had already stopped shrinking. "I came looking for a home, and instead, I remembered I could build one." The first frost came early. Not the heavy freeze that killed crops or cracked fence rails, but the kind that whispered through the morning, like a warning coating the porch rails in a silver glaze, crisping the edges of the grass and turning the breath of cattle into steam. Estella pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped into the cold air, boots crunching over frostbitten soil. The sky was clear, sharp, stretched wide and endless above the mesa. She liked the cold. It kept things honest. Inside the barn, Calder was already saddling the horses. He greeted her with a nod and a tired half-smile. "She's ready," he said, patting the mare. Estella eyed him. "You didn't sleep." He didn't deny it. "Couldn't he? Weather's changing. Always makes my mind race." "You think something's coming?" Calder paused, then answered slowly. "Not something. Someone." That was how it began. 2 days later, trouble rode in under a clear sky. A stranger showed up at Gray Mesa near sundown. Alone, on a black horse to lean for comfort, with a rifle strapped too casually across his saddle. He wore a long coat and a trimmed beard, but his eyes gave him away. Calder saw him first. He was by the south field checking the water line when the rider crested the ridge and started down toward the barn. Calder watched without moving, then slowly walked to meet him. Estella, watching from the porch, knew something was wrong by the stillness in his shoulders. When she reached them, the stranger had dismounted. He was younger than she'd thought from a distance, maybe early 30s, with a wiry frame and hands that moved too fast to be casual. "You Calder Greyhawk?" the man asked. "I am." The stranger's smile was thin. "Name, S. Nathan Barrow. Heard your spread's expanding. Figured you might need hired help." Calder didn't smile. "And who told you that?" Nathan shrugged. "Word gets around." Estella stepped up beside Calder. Nathan's eyes flicked to her sharp, curious. Calder's voice stayed even. "You ride alone?" "I ride smart," Nathan said. Estella didn't like him. It wasn't just his tone. It was the way he looked at the land, not with respect, but calculation. "We've already got a crew," Calder said. "Could always use one more. Especially someone with connections in Elvado and Gallup." Nathan adjusted his gloves. "I know how to move cattle quiet. I know the roads most folks avoid, and I've got nothing tying me down." Estella spoke before she could stop herself. "That's not a strength." Nathan raised an eyebrow. No, she said. "It means no one's ever trusted you enough to stay." A silence followed. Calder didn't ask her to hold her tongue. He just said, "We're not hiring right now." Nathan's jaw ticked, but he nodded. "Fair enough. Just thought I'd offer." He mounted up again, tipping his hat. "Nice place. Lotta open space." Then he rode off without a backward glance. Estella turned to Calder. "You know him?" "Not directly, but I've heard the name. He ran with a crew during the war. Graycoats turned bounty men. Last I heard, he was in Colorado territory, stirring trouble near the railroads." "What's he doing here?" "Testing fences," Calder said. "Seeing where we're weak." Estella felt the cold settle deeper in her bones. The following days were tense. Nothing happened, no theft, no fire, no warnings carved into fence posts. But Calder doubled patrols. Ansel started carrying a rifle again, even while feeding chickens. Estella noticed the way Delfina lingered longer at the ranch after deliveries, her eyes scanning the tree line. It was in fear. Not quite. It was preparation. And for Estella, it stirred something old and unwelcome, the feeling of being hunted without knowing when the first shot would come. She started locking the ledgers every night. Not because of Nathan, but because she suddenly felt the weight of everything they'd built. The risk of losing it. One morning, she found Calder in the barn oiling a pistol she hadn't seen before. It was older, well-maintained, with initials etched into the handle. She didn't ask where it came from. Instead, she said, "Do you think he'll come back?" Calder looked up. "I think he's watching, waiting to see if we'll let our guard down." Estella nodded, then sat beside him on a bale of hay. "He's not the first man who's tried to take what wasn't his," she said. Calder didn't answer right away. Then no. But he might be the first to test what happens when someone fights back. She studied his profile, jaw tight, eyes distant. She reached out and touched his hand. "I won't run," she said. "Not again. Not for anyone." Calder's hand closed around hers. "You're not alone this time," he said. That night, they held a meeting in the house. Just the three of them, Estella, Calder, and Ansel. "We should assume he'll come back," Ansel said. "And not just to talk." "I've already asked Lucinda's brother to send word if Nathan's seen near the trade routes," Calder said. "We'll know if he's gathering a crew." Ansel looked at Estella. "You ever fired a rifle?" She nodded. "I can handle myself." He grinned. Didn't he doubt that? They drew up a plan. Night watches and shifts, locking the storehouse, moving livestock closer to the main barn. Nothing that would spook the neighbors but enough to keep Gray Mesa from becoming an easy target. Estella didn't sleep that night. She stood by the window, looking out at the land. The moon hung low and cold. Somewhere beyond those hills, Nathan Barrow was watching. But she didn't feel powerless. She felt anchored. She had a name now, a home, a husband who listened, a past that didn't define her, and a future that wasn't just survival, but ownership. Nathan Barrow could come. He could try. But this land had already taught her how to stand her ground. And she would. A storm doesn't scare a woman who's already lived through fire. The first shot rang out just after midnight. It echoed through the valley like a bone snapped sharp. Final, not meant to scare, but to start. Estella bolted upright in bed, heart hammering in her chest. In the same moment, Calder was already out of bed, rifle in hand, barefoot and silent as he crossed to the window. Another shot. This one closer. "Barn," Calder muttered. "They're testing the perimeter." Estella pulled on her boots, yanked her shawl around her shoulders. She knew without being told this wasn't some drunk ranch hand firing into the dark. This was Nathan Barrow and whoever he'd brought. Outside, the wind howled across the open mesa, scattering dry leaves across the yard like whispers. The moon hung high and thin, silvering the dust and stone. A perfect night for a man like Nathan. Quiet. Clear. Calculated. They met Ansel in the barn. He was crouched near the stalls, rifle ready, eyes sharp. "Two of them by the west fence," he said. "Didn't breach? Just spooked the horses and vanished." "Trying to draw us out," Calder said. Estella looked around, taking inventory. Tools. Nails. Lanterns. The old revolver she'd kept hidden in the loft after Whitaker's letter. "We don't take the bait," Calder said. "We defend from here. If they come in close, we answer hard." Estella's breath came steady now. The fear was still there. Yes, but it was edged with clarity. The kind that only came when you had something worth losing. They took shifts until dawn, eyes peeled, fingers curled around cold steel. But nothing more came. Not that night. The next morning, Calder rode into town. Alone? Estella didn't want him to, but he insisted. "They're testing us," he said. "That means they're watching. If I stay here too long, they'll think we're scared. And that's worse than any bullet." He kissed her on the forehead, brief but firm. "I'll be back by sundown." Estella spent the day reinforcing the doors and windows. She rigged bells at the entryways, positioned tools where they could be grabbed fast. Ansel worked quietly beside her, stringing barbed wire across the back fence and checking the ammunition stores twice. "You know," he said mid-morning, "you've got the calm of someone who's been through worse." Estella didn't look up. "That S because I have." "Mind if I ask what?" She hesitated. "Then my father was a gambler. When the debts came due, he sent me away, said he was keeping me safe. I was 13. The man who took me in wasn't kind. I survived. But not because anyone came to save me." Ansel was quiet for a long time. "Then you ever tell Calder that?" "The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice." "Why not?" "Because he never asked. And because I didn't want to be loved like something broken." Ansel nodded. "You re not?" "No," she said. "I'm not." By sundown, Calder returned, clothes dusty, jaw tense. He dismounted and handed Estella a letter. She unfolded it carefully. "Gray Mesa, don't belong to you. It belongs to men who took this land first and bled for it. Leave now, and no blood gets spilled." In Bestella's lip curled. This land never belonged to men like him. It belonged to people who worked it. Calder looked at her. "I don't want to fight. Not if we can avoid it. But you'll stand if it comes." He met her eyes. "I won't be the first to fire, but I'll be the last to fall." That night, the mesa went quiet again. Too quiet. Around midnight, the horses started whining. Ansel rushed out first. Estella followed, lantern in hand. They found the south gate slashed open. Rope cut. Lock broken. But nothing stolen. No livestock missing. Just a message. A warning. And a knife driven into the wooden fence post. Blade sunk deep. "They want us scared," Estella whispered. "They want us cornered," Calder said. "No," Estella said, voice steady now. "They want us reactive. But we're not playing that game." The next morning, Estella rode out early. Alone? She didn't tell Calder until she was already saddled. He stepped onto the porch, boots untied, shirt half-buttoned. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice low. "To the Morales ranch," she said. "Lucinda's brother has a telegraph. I'm sending word to Sheriff Cardenas in a BQ. We need legal protection, official protection." Calder hesitated. "You think he'll help?" "I think the law works better when someone asks for it out loud. And I'm done whispering." She rode fast, cutting across the valley, wind in her ears, dirt kicking up behind her. Her pulse thrummed with purpose, not fear momentum. At the Morales ranch, Lucinda's brother Mateo helped her draft the message. It was short, direct, and heavy with consequence. Gray Mesa, under threat. Suspect, Nathan Barreau. Multiple trespasses. Armed and violent. Requesting immediate assistance. Mateo sent it without question. He liked Estella. And more importantly, he respected her. By the time she rode back, Calder was waiting at the gate. "You came back," he said, more relieved than surprised. "I told you I would." "What if the sheriff says no?" "Then we defend this place the old-fashioned way," she said. "With grit and guns, and grit again." He smiled faintly. "Do I scare you a little now?" She teased. "Only in the best ways." That night, they didn't sleep. They waited. Barrow would come. It was just a matter of time. And this time, Estella wouldn't flinch. She would face him not as a girl discarded by cowards, not as a bride betrayed, but as a woman with land under her nails, fire in her chest, and a name that meant something. Because if they wanted a war, they'd get one. And she wouldn't fight like a victim. She'd fight like the land had taught her. "I'm not guarding this ranch because I married into it. I'm guarding it because it's mine." The sheriff arrived at sunrise. Estella saw the cloud of dust rising over the eastern ridge before she heard the hooves. A single rider, lean frame, dark coat, badge glinting faintly in the morning light. Sheriff Diego Cardenas. He didn't dismount right away, just scanned the ranch from the saddle fence lines, outbuildings. The way Calder stood with a rifle slung across his back but not raised. Finally, the sheriff nodded once, then climbed down and approached slowly, bootheels crunching against the frost-hardened ground. "You sent the wire?" he asked, looking directly at Estella. "I did," she said. He tipped his hat. "Then I reckon we should talk." They sat on the porch while Calder poured coffee, and Unseld watched from the side, silent as a shadow. Cardenas listened carefully as Estella recounted everything Nathan's first arrival. The midnight shots, the threats, the gate, the knife. "He didn't just show up once," she said. "He's watching. He wants us scared, off balance. He's waiting for the right time to hit." The sheriff sipped from the tin cup and exhaled through his nose. "Nathan Barrow doesn't make empty threats. He is a vulture, follows scent of fear and weakness. Trouble is, he's also smart. Rarely leaves proof." "You want proof?" Estella asked. "We have the knife. We have the note." Cardenas nodded. "It'll help. But you need more. Witnesses. Pattern. Town folks who'll say it's not just ranch gossip." Ansel finally spoke. "They want to talk. Most of them are scared or tired of taking sides." "Then I'll talk louder," Estella said. Cardenas gave her a long look. "You're not like most ranch wives." "No," she said. "I am not a ranch wife. I am a ranch owner." That made the sheriff grin. "All right then," he said. "I'll do what I can on the legal end. But if he comes again, don't wait for permission to defend what's yours." Estella stood. "We won tea." For the next 3 days they fortified. Fences were reinforced. Doors were double-barred. Lanterns were positioned at every major entrance, and Calder walked the line every night, never speaking, just moving steady as a heartbeat. Estella helped with the patrols, learned the rifle angles from the roof, checked and rechecked the escape routes for the animals. Not because she expected to run, but because she wouldn't let the land suffer for one man's rage. Each night they took turns sleeping. Short naps, shallow and uneasy, hearts tuned to the slightest sound. But Nathan didn't come. Not yet. On the 4th day, news came from Delphina. He was gathering men. 3, maybe 4. Drifters mostly. Paid quick. No questions asked. Word was they'd been seen on the edge of the Morales ranch, mapping roads, counting cattle. "They're waiting for something," Delphina said. "A window." Estella nodded. "Then we close it." That evening, she and Calder stood in the barn, cleaning weapons, sharpening blades. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Do you think we can stop them?" "I think we have to," he replied. She didn't ask if he was scared. She could see it in his eyes. Not panic, not weakness, but the fear that comes with loving something too much to lose it. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Marrying me, bringing me into this." He set the blade down. "Estella, I didn't bring you into this. You chose to stand beside me. And if you hadn't, I'd be facing it alone. So no, I don't regret a damn thing." She felt her throat tighten, but she held his gaze. "You think they'll come at night?" Calder nodded. "They always do." Then he paused, voice lowering. "But what if we flipped the table?" She raised an eyebrow. "You want to take it to them?" "Not a fight. A message." Estella leaned forward. "Go on." That night, under moonlight and quiet tension, Estella and Calder rode out with Unseld along the ridge above the trading route where Nathan's men were rumored to be camping. They didn't engage. They didn't even get close. But they left signs, fresh boot prints, cut branches, a single bullet casing left upright on a rock like a calling card. By the time morning broke, the message was clear. "We see you too." Back at Gray Mesa, Estella stood on the porch and watched the road, hands clasped behind her back, spine straight. If Nathan wanted a war, he'd have to walk into it knowing they were ready. She turned to Calder. "We don't hide anymore." He nodded. "We own the ground we stand on." Later, they found a dead rabbit nailed to the barn door. A message. Estella stared at it, then pulled it down without a word, wrapped it in cloth and buried it beneath the old cottonwood. Ansel watched her from a distance, shaking his head. "He is playing dirty." "He's playing scared," she corrected. "Scared men are the most dangerous, or the most predictable. They exchanged a look. A plan began to form. The next day, Estella went into town. She walked into the trading post with her shoulders squared and her voice calm. "I need supplies," she said to the clerk. "Ammo, lantern oil, salt, and tobacco." "Tobacco?" he asked, blinking. "For the men coming to kill us," she said. "Figured they'd want to smoke before the dirt closes over them." The clerk stared. Word spread fast after that, and maybe that was the point. By sundown, Sheriff Cardenas returned with 2 deputies. "I can't stay long," he told Calder, "but I brought extra arms. They'll hold with you through the night." "Appreciate it," Calder said. Estella offered them coffee and biscuits. Not because she felt like hosting, but because she believed in feeding the people who stood between her land and ruin. When the sun dipped below the ridge, the mesa turned to fire, red, then deep violet. And in that hour of hush, of waiting, of last light, Estella stood at the edge of her porch. Rifle in hand, hair braided tight, shawl pinned at her shoulders. She looked out over her land, her home, and felt no fear, only readiness. Whatever came next, she was here for it. Rooted, resilient, refusing to yield. I used to flinch at footsteps in the dark. Now I sharpened my blade to their rhythm. They came in silence, just past the hour when most people dream. 3 riders. No torches, no noise. Just the soft crunch of hooves and the distant snap of leather. Moonlight caught the edge of a rifle as they moved toward the south field, assuming the shadows would hide them. But Gray Mesa wasn't asleep. Estella heard the first hoofbeat before the dogs even barked. She was already at the window, rifle in hand, heart steady. Outside, Calder moved like a ghost across the porch, signaling to one of the deputies near the gate. Ensel was crouched low behind the water trough, shotgun across his lap. No one spoke. They didn't need to. It had been 4 nights since the rabbit. 4 nights of tension tight as barbed wire. Every creak of the windmill, every cry of a hawk had made the blood rise and the breath shorten. But this was real. They waited until the riders dismounted, until one of them stepped forward, tugging a bolt cutter from his saddlebag and approaching the fence like he'd done it before. Then Calder fired. The shot rang out so clean and sharp, it felt like a bell had been struck. The bolt cutter clattered to the ground. The rider stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, screaming. 2 others drew their guns and fired blindly toward the house, but the shadows betrayed them. Unsel fired next, hitting the second man in the thigh. He went down hard, crawling for cover. The third one, tall, fast, with a long coat flapping behind him, ducked low and dashed for the west side of the barn. Estella followed. She moved quick and quiet, rounding the corner just as the man disappeared behind the corral. "Drop it!" she called, voice flat and even. The man turned, gun raised. She didn't hesitate. 1 shot. Center mass. He fell without a word. Estella lowered the rifle slowly. Her hands weren't shaking. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. The blood pooled around the man's coat, glistening black in the moonlight. She didn't know his name. Didn't he need to? She walked back toward the house as the dogs barked and the dust began to settle. By dawn, it was over. 2 were alive. The wounded one with the thigh injury had passed out from blood loss, but would live. The other, shot in the shoulder, glared at everyone like a trapped wolf. Sheriff Cardenas arrived just after sunrise, with a wagon, 2 deputies, and a grim look on his face. Calder met him near the barn. 3 of them, he said. 1 dead. Cardenas nodded. And Barrow. Wasn't he with them? Cardenas cursed under his breath. He sent them as bait. To test our response, Calder said. To see how hard we'd hit back? Cardenas looked around. Looks like you passed. Estella stepped out of the house, rifle slung over her shoulder, sleeves rolled, blood still on her boots. Where are you taking them? She asked, nodding to the prisoners. A Bicu jail, Cardenas replied. Long enough to talk, maybe turn on their boss. Estella didn't blink. Make them talk. Cardenas studied her for a moment. You ain't the same woman who sent me that wire. I'm not, she said. I'm the woman who buried a man last night and slept just fine after. Cardenas gave a slow nod. I'll keep you posted. As the wagon rattled away, Estella turned to Calder. He didn't come himself, she said. He will, Calder said. He just doesn't want to be seen until he's sure he can win. Estella stared out at the mesa. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of blood and iron, but underneath it something else. Resolve. That afternoon, they burned the bandit's coat. It was Calder's idea. Leave his body to the sheriff. But his things, his threats, we don't keep those here. So they lit a fire in the pit and watched the long black coat curl and blacken and vanish into ash. Estella stood beside it until the last thread disintegrated. No prayers. No mourning. Just closure. Delphina arrived at dusk with more supplies and something wrapped in cloth. A gift, she said, handing it to Estella. Estella unfolded the cloth. Inside was a hand-stitched banner. Rough canvas, red thread. It read, Gray Mesa Stands. Estella swallowed hard. I thought maybe, Delphina said softly, you'd want to raise it. Calder helped her hang it above the barn door. It fluttered in the wind like a flag defiant. Quiet, unshaken. Words getting out, Delphina added. What you did. People are talking. Let them, Estella said. Let him hear it. They stood together a moment longer, then Delphina squeezed her hand and rode back toward her homestead. Later that night, Estella sat on the porch alone. She watched the sky shift from gold to blue to ink. Coyotes cried in the distance. Somewhere far off, a hawk screamed. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, Calder had joined her, silent as always. He handed her a cup of coffee, black and hot. Unsell's checking the north fence again, he said. Just to be sure. She nodded, then looked down at her hands, calloused, blistered, blood creased at the knuckles. Not the hands she'd brought to Gray Mesa, but the hands that would stay. I killed a man last night, she said. Calder didn't flinch. You defended your home. Is there a difference? Yes, he said. And the difference is he came to take. You stood to protect. She sipped the coffee, the silence between them long and full. Finally, she said, I'm not afraid anymore. He looked at her. Of Nathan. Of being seen, she said. Of being powerful. Of being a woman who doesn't wait to be saved. The fire from the banner light flickered on her cheek. Calder reached over and touched her hand. You were never small, he said. You were just surrounded by people who needed you to be. She turned to him, eyes shining. Not anymore. The wind picked up again, snapping the canvas above the barn. It carried a promise. Not of peace, but of readiness. Last night, I didn't hesitate, and I won't ever again. The letter came 3 days later. Not by courier, not by sheriff. It was tied to the leg of a dead hawk, left at the gate of Gray Mesa before sunrise. Estella found it on her morning round blood dried at the bird's neck, feathers stiff, eyes glassy and unblinking. The note was tucked beneath the wing, folded tight. You spilled blood. Now I will return the favor. When the fire comes, don't look to the law. This ends when you leave, or when you burn. Imbestella read it twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table without a word, poured herself coffee, and waited for Calder to come in from the field. When he saw it, he didn't speak either, just rubbed his jaw and sat beside her. Ansel walked in next, picked up the letter. Read it. Rolled his eyes. Dramatic son of a bitch. He's not bluffing, Calder said. I know, Ansel replied. But a man who sends threats by hawk isn't stable. That's desperation, not strategy. Estella leaned back in her chair. Desperate men still kill. She looked toward the barn window where the morning light crept across the floor. The silence between them wasn't fear anymore, it was calculation. He's telling us it's coming soon, she said. Calder nodded. Within days, maybe tonight. Then we take the fight out of his hands, Estella said. Unsell raised a brow. Meaning, We control where it happens. We set the ground. The mesa beyond the east pasture was mostly brush-hard clay. Open sky, no cover for ambush. Calder had ridden that stretch since he was 12. Estella had studied the curves and dips over the last few months like scripture. It was perfect. By midday, they'd moved the cattle behind the western ridge, secured the tools and feed into the root cellar, and cleared the east pasture of anything flammable. I want him to think he's cornered us, Estella said. But we'll be waiting, Ansel added. They dug shallow foxholes, concealed with loose brush, just wide enough for a man to crouch and fire. The two deputies who had stayed since the last attack helped silently, following Estella's commands without question now. The tone in her voice left no room for doubt. She wasn't pleading. She was preparing. Delphina brought food and a pair of old war binoculars she claimed her father used against the Texans. They still work, she said, handing them to Estella. Aim steady. Estella smiled faintly. I will. By sundown, the wind shifted, dry, sharp, carried the faintest scent of tobacco and sweat. He's close, Calder said, climbing onto the barn roof with a scope. East Ridge. 3 horses. Just 3? Estella asked. 4, he corrected, after another moment. He brought a new one. Ansel loaded shells into his rifle, snapped it shut. Could be a hired killer, or someone with more to lose. Estella's jaw tightened. Either way, we end it here. The first shot was his. Not at them, but into the air. A flare. Red burst into the sky like blood lit on fire. A signal. Then the sound of hooves. 5 riders now, galloping hard, moving as one. Dust kicked high behind them, a war cry echoing across the flat. Estella ducked low in her trench, rifle tight against her shoulder. She could hear Calder's calm breaths nearby. Ansel was already locked in, aiming from the edge of the ridge. Wait, Calder said quietly. The riders came closer. Closer. Now. The rifles cracked in perfect rhythm. The first horse went down. The rider flipped hard over the neck, landing with a sickening crunch. Another shouted and veered left straight into Ansel's shot. The others scattered, but Nathan didn't retreat. He rode straight for the house, revolver raised, eyes wild. Estella moved fast-printed from her trench toward the center ridge, cutting him off. He saw her too late. She fired once. Missed. He fired. Grazed her side. Pain ripped through her, but she didn't stop. She dropped low, fired again. This time, she hit. Nathan's horse bucked. He tumbled, rolled, and scrambled to his feet, still firing. Come on, then, he roared. Estella stood fully now, bleeding, panting, rage coiling tight in her chest. This is your last ride, Barrow, she shouted. Not before I take something from you? He charged again, but Calder was already behind him, rifle raised. Drop it, Calder barked. Nathan froze. Looked between them, Estella in front, Calder behind. Funny, he hissed. Didn't think a woman and a half-breed would hold this long. Estella's voice was ice. Funny because you thought you were the wolf. She stepped closer. But wolves don't send letters, and they don't run. Nathan raised his gun. Estella shot first. He hit the ground with a thud, eyes wide, breath short, blood soaking through his shirt. She walked to him, stood over his broken form. He looked up at her, blinking. You think you won? He rasped. She leaned down. I didn't come to win. I came to outlast men like you. Then she took the revolver from his dying hand, emptied the chamber, and tossed it into the dirt. Behind her, the rest of the attackers had either been killed, captured, or fled. It was over. By dawn, the sky above Gray Mesa was quiet again. Sheriff Cardenas arrived just as Estella finished bandaging her wound. He surveyed the dead, the wounded, the battered field. You were right, he said softly. Estella didn't smile. She walked to the center of the pasture where Nathan had fallen. There, she placed a single stone. No marker. No name. Just a warning to anyone who came next. Calder approached her slowly, his hand brushing hers. You all right? He asked. I bled, she said, but I didn't break. They stood there in silence for a moment, wind catching the edge of her coat, the sun slowly warming the earth. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She had stood her ground. And it had held. He thought this land was soft because a woman claimed it. He forgot this land was never his to take. The morning after the bloodshed, the mesa breathed again. It wasn't peace not yet, but something had shifted. The land felt heavier, grounded, like it had absorbed what it needed and was finally ready to settle. Estella stood barefoot in the yard, a shawl around her shoulders, the sun cresting over the eastern ridge. Smoke from the last of the funeral pyres curled gently into the sky. No names were spoken. No prayers. Just silence and ash. Calder joined her, his hand brushing hers. You should rest, he said softly. I will. Later. Her body ached. The bandage at her side was stiff with dried blood. But she wouldn't lie down. Not yet. Not until everything that needed doing was done. Inside the barn, Delphina and Ansel were sorting supplies, taking inventory of what had been broken or burned. The deputies had returned to town with the prisoners, and Sheriff Cardenas promised an official statement by week's end, naming Estella the rightful claimant and defender of Gray Mesa. But even with the law on her side, she knew what she'd earned wasn't protection. It was reputation. And out here, that was stronger than any badge. She spent the next few days rebuilding, fixing fences, cleaning blood from the porch, scrubbing the barn walls with lye and tears and grit. It was Delphina who brought the message. There's a preacher coming, she said, from Santa Rosa. Word is, he wants to bless the land, put something good back in the dirt. Estella didn't scoff. She just nodded. Let him come. So the preacher came, a quiet man with a weathered Bible and a voice like low thunder. He said little, asked nothing, only stood with Estella at the highest point of the property and spoke into the wind. This land has seen blood. Let it now know peace. This woman has stood. Let her now rest. What was taken is returned. What was broken can grow again. Estella felt the words settle in her bones. Not magic, not absolution, but permission. That night, she slept, deep, dreamless. The days that followed were quieter than she expected. No more strangers. No riders on the ridge. Just the sound of hammers, of cattle lowing, of life returning. She walked the property at dusk, and again at dawn, her boots steady, her mind slowly unclenching. One morning, as she sat mending a broken bridle strap, Delphina joined her, passing her a small folded note. This came from a BQ, she said. It's from one of the prisoners. Estella read it slowly. I don't ask forgiveness. I just want you to know, he promised us this land. Said it was stolen. Said you were the thief. But when you stood there bleeding, unbroken eyes saw the truth. You didn't steal anything. You defended it. No name. No apology. But it was enough. She burned the note and buried the ashes beneath the cottonwood. By late summer, the ranch was blooming again. Calves were born healthy. The water line held. The apple trees near the north fence were finally bearing fruit. Estella sat on the porch one afternoon, watching Calder mend a saddle and listening to the wind. It carried no warnings now. Just dust and bird call and far-off laughter from Delphina and Ansel near the spring. She reached for the ledger, the one she had kept since arriving. Pages yellowed, corners torn, ink faded from sweat and fire and time. She opened to the first page. Arrival, 1 suitcase, 1 dress, 1 name I might never use. She smiled. Turned to the last page. Today, 1 husband, 1 home, 1 name I earned. Calder looked up. You writing something new? She nodded. A new ledger. Not for debts. For what we've built. He grinned. That one's gonna get heavy. She grinned back. Good. Let it. Because that way every fence built, every hand held, every morning survived, was the price of permanence. She wasn't just living here. She was rooting. The new sign arrived a week later. Hand-carved. Clean lines. No flourishes. Gray Mesa Ranch, Estella, and Calder Shea hung it herself. Drove the post deep into the earth. Set the sign high. Then stepped back. Dirt on her palms, sweat on her brow, a satisfaction deeper than pride blooming in her chest. She looked over at Calder, who was watching from the fence. "Looks good," he said. "It does," she replied. "It feels like something that won't blow away." He walked over, took her hand. She squeezed it, then looked out across the land. "Funny," she murmured. "All this time, I thought freedom meant leaving, but maybe it means staying." He nodded slowly. "Freedom doesn't mean the world owes you nothing," he said. "It means you owe nothing to the world that tried to break you." She looked at the hills, the sky, the house behind them, the cottonwood tree, still standing, still growing. The fire came, and I'm still here. Autumn came without ceremony. No sudden storms, no great winds, just a slow shifting of light. It's the kind you don't notice until the days are shorter and the air tastes like copper and wood smoke. The mesa turned gold. Not flashy, not loud, just steady, honest. Estella woke before dawn each morning, as she always had. But now there was no edge in her chest, no bracing for something to go wrong. The quiet wasn't a warning anymore. It was simply quiet. She sat on the porch with coffee, listening to the low rustle of cattle, the occasional whinny, the creak of the windmill. Calder joined her, like always. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't need to. The scars on her side had begun to fade. Not disappear, just soften. They didn't hurt anymore. Not the way they used to. One morning, she pulled the ledger from the drawer and opened to a blank page. She wrote, "Final entry. I thought I had to run to survive. I was wrong. Staying, risking, building, that's the hardest thing a person can do. But it's the most human." She closed the book and set it aside. There were new stories to live now. Around late October, a young woman came riding in from the south. Alone. Ragged coat. One saddlebag. Eyes sharp. Estella spotted her before she reached the main gate. Calder stood. Estella stopped him with a touch. "Let me." She walked out, met the woman halfway. They didn't speak at first. Then, "Is this Gray Mesa?" "It is." The woman swallowed. Her voice cracked. "I heard. There was a place here where someone fought back. A woman. I didn't know where else to go." Estella looked at her, saw the same fire she'd once seen in the mirror. Not fully lit yet, but smoldering. "What's your name?" "May." Estella nodded. "You eat yet, May?" She shook her head. "Then you're staying for supper." It was indeed a question. May blinked. Tears threatened, but she didn't let them fall. That night, they set an extra place at the table. Delphina made stew. Insel told the story of the hawk letter, which got a rare laugh out of Calder. And May, shaky, tired, unsure, listened, like a starving woman handed a second helping. She didn't say much, but Estella noticed how she watched, how she memorized, and that was enough. The first snow came early that year. Just a dusting, but enough to coat the cottonwood and hush the earth. Estella stood beneath it, face tilted to the sky, hands bare. The cold kissed her skin, but didn't bite. Calder stepped up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and said nothing. They stood there a long while, just breathing, just being. Later that winter, a traveling writer passed through. Said he was collecting true stories of the frontier. He asked Estella what had happened out here. She thought for a long moment before answering. A man came to claim what he never earned, and a woman stayed to defend what she built with her own hands. "And what would you call that story?" he asked. She smiled. "Just another chapter of the West. The real West. The part no one sings about." He wrote it down. But Estella didn't wait for him to publish it. She already knew the story that mattered most was the one lived every day, a porch that didn't need watching, a morning that arrived without fear, a table where no one sat hungry, and a life that didn't have to be loud to be strong. Come spring, May asked to stay on. Said she'd never had a place that didn't ask her to shrink. Estella smiled and handed her the mending pile. Then you'd better learn to sew. May laughed. The sound was new, bright, unapologetic. And the next day, she showed up at dawn, ready to work. Some nights Estella still woke before the sun, heart thumping for reasons she couldn't name. But now, instead of reaching for a gun, she reached for Calder's hand. He always stirred, murmured something soft, and squeezed back. Just enough to remind her the war was over, the healing had begun. And some scars weren't there to be erased. They were there to prove you'd endured. Gray Mesa never made the papers. Not the way the mining towns did. Not the way the outlaw stories did. But travelers spoke of it. A patch of land where the winds sang differently. Where a woman once stood when no one else would. And the lesson was simple. The West didn't belong to the men who took. It belonged to the people who stayed.